Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for showing up for the last session of the day. We'll try to keep you entertained and get you out of here right on time. My name is Beth Long. I am a solutions strategist with New Relic. If you're not familiar with New Relic, we build a SaaS observability platform, and we deal with a lot of incidents internally as well as working with our customers on their incident response process. Now, before I was on the solution strategy team, I was a software engineer for our reliability awareness team, which owns, among other things, our incident response process. So I've been steeped in this for quite a long time.
Hi, I'm Eliza Binette, and I work at New Relic as well as a group lead supporting the reliability enablement teams, and reliability awareness was one of those teams.
So today we're going to talk about life at the sharp end. Is this a phrase that's familiar to folks, the sharp end? The sharp end of a system is the end of the system that is up against the physical realities. So who is at the sharp end of a system? Well, we've heard about the OODA loop. Fighter pilots are at the sharp end of the system. Firefighters are at the sharp end of the system. They're not sitting in an office running simulations of fire risk. They are actually on the ground holding the fire hose, dealing with the fires. People in software organizations at the sharp end are the people writing the code, and in particular, the people who carry the pager, the people who deal with incidents day to day. Now, a few years ago, we had a phase where our growth had outstripped our process, and we were dealing with a lot of incidents. Things were, metaphorically speaking, on fire a lot of the time. And we revamped our incident response process in part with help from one of our lead SREs who in a prior career had actually been a firefighter. So he helped bring in some of the patterns he had learned in that field to software. Some things that are pretty standard now, like severities for incidents. In firefighting, you need to know how many ladders to bring to a fire, how many resources to devote. In software, you need to know how many engineering resources to devote to a problem, and we use severities as an indicator of that. We also delineated two very clear roles. One was the tech lead in an incident response. This was the person who's actually doing the troubleshooting, hands on keyboard. And the other role was the incident commander. This is the person who wasn't in charge of troubleshooting, but rather in charge of coordinating the response. This is the role that we're really interested in talking about today. Now, does anyone remember a couple years ago, February of 2017, Amazon S3's US East region went down? Anyone remember this?
Everybody
Yes.
has to remember this. It was terrible.
We noticed the problem right away. It was like, oh, that's interesting. S3 is down. It will surely be back in a few minutes. It was not back in a few minutes. And we very quickly learned real time what our systems did when S3 was down. It was a very interesting day. Our customer-facing systems were impacted. Our ability to deploy was impacted because of deploy assets stored in S3. Most of our third-party dependencies were impacted. And it was a very stressful day, but it was also an example of a shining example of a success that we've had at New Relic, which is a team called the New Relic Emergency Response Force. For short, the NERFs. The NERFs are our best incident commanders. They automatically get paged in to assist with high severity incidents. And they got paged in that day in full force. This was one of very few incidents where we had not one incident commander coordinating the response, but we actually had a central emergency commander, and then we had several other incident commanders who fanned out and managed the response in different areas of the organization. Now, it was really clear that day how important it was to have coordination of such a massive response to a mega incident like S3 being offline for 14 hours. But the fact of the matter is, any incident benefits from having an incident commander.
Yes, it does. All right, so now in order to talk about the incident commander role, we should set a little bit of context. So we'll set the scene first by talking about the nature of incidents and talking about to talk about that, we'll talk about what a good incident response process looks like. And we'll talk about the one that we're familiar with, which is New Relic, which is based on a lot of DevOps practices. A lot of shops are using this sort of response themselves now. Then we'll explore what incident commanders do during an incident that is so valuable, and some of the skills that they really need to have. And then the next thing we'll cover is how you can train great incident commanders. So not only what it takes to train them, but the habits that make good IC commanders really great. So first of all, what exactly are we talking about when we say the word incident? It's a fairly overloaded term. It's used in a lot of different ways, and it's also dependent often on the tooling that you're using and how they describe an incident. So for the purpose of today's talk, we will define an incident as something that your software is misbehaving, it's negatively impacting your customers. So that's an incident. Now, some incidents are pretty straightforward. When it happens, you really know like how big a problem it is and that you need to respond quickly. So for example, if your customers can't log in, the engineers know they need to respond quickly, and support knows what the impact is. Now, other sorts of incidents may be judgment calls. They may need a little more expertise. So for example, if a queue starts backing up, it's not impacting your customers right now, but if you don't do something about it soon, something will go bad for your customers. And so, is that an incident? Maybe. What about if you have a feature with a bug in it, but nobody's actually noticed it yet? So if your service breaks its SLA, is that an incident? Who knows? So to be more precise for this conversation, let's actually say that an incident is an event that triggers an incident response process, because not every blip actually calls in all of the engineers to help. It's a little bit of a recursive definition, but it's useful for today because we actually need to talk about the incident response process. Now, a lot of traditional companies have what's termed a NOC, so that's a Network Operations Center, and they have people whose job it is to pay attention to what's going on, monitor their systems, make sure everything's running fine, and actually respond and fix the problems if they notice them. And so those customers tend to have more rigid processes, so they are on the far left for you end of the spectrum. A lot of our customers do still have a NOC, and those tend to be the older, larger enterprise customers. On the other end of this spectrum, you have the ad hoc end of the world. And so this is where every incident is its own unique adventure, and it's up to the person that responds to figure out how this story will unfold. And they probably don't have a lot of process. They just have some organizational habits that they have developed, but nothing super structured. And this is fine too. We see this with some of our customers as well, and it tends to be the smaller, leaner companies that can have a much more lightweight touch. Now at New Relic, we're in the middle of this spectrum. So our processes are born from DevOps. So we definitely have an agile, iterative process, but we have systems that are large and complex enough now that we really do need some process. So our goal is to have just the right amount of process and not just have process for process's sake. That will just make people grumpy, and it really won't be helpful. So really, no matter where you are on this spectrum, what we hope today is that you'll be able to take back some ideas about how your current process exists today and make them better, and whether you're on the rigid end or the ad hoc end of the process.
So let's unpack what the incident lifecycle looks like. And we're, again, going to use the incident lifecycle that we're familiar with at New Relic, but it should be pretty familiar to any of you who are working in a fairly DevOps-y model. So one thing that people don't always talk about when they talk about incidents is there's this initial phase, sort of the prodrome of the incident, where something is brewing. This might be a long time, or it might be a short time. In the case of the Amazon S3 outage, this was a very short time period. It was about as long as it took for an engineer to mistype a command and hit enter at the command line. Other times, things are starting to go sideways very slowly, and eventually they accumulate into an actual incident. Regardless, eventually, someone notices that there's a problem in the system. And at this point, you kick off a full organizational incident process. So at New Relic, the incident commander role is so integral to our response process that it is actually the way that you initiate an official incident. You go into a Slack channel, you talk to our incident response bot, and you say 911 IC me, which makes you the IC, the incident commander, and that's the official start of an incident. So whatever the process is at a particular organization, there's some way of declaring to the organization, we have an incident and we're in the midst of a response. And so at this point, you move into triage. How bad is it? How are customers being affected? What exactly is breaking? And then hypothesizing. Why is it breaking? What exactly is going on under the hood? And what do we need to do to resolve it, to get the system back into a healthy enough state that we can end the response? Eventually, you succeed in doing that. Sometimes, again, that's a judgment call. Like, okay, it's unbroken enough, we can call the incident and move this back into a kind of regular engineering space. And your problem is solved, at least for the moment. Now, of course, there's additional steps. There's usually some kind of incident retrospective or post-mortem process. There are incident follow-ups. This is all really important, but it's not really what we care about today. Today, we're not as much concerned with follow-up or with the time to detection. We're really concerned about this time to resolution, from when the incident is actually declared to when the incident is declared over.
So the process depends on a lot of pieces, a lot of tooling, and you can see here that a lot of the tools that we use are specifically geared around collaboration and communication. So how do people in different organizations, different time zones, different locations, physically different locations, communicate during an incident? How do they work together? How do they know what processes to follow and who does what? At New Relic, we do have, Beth mentioned a couple of these. We have 3 clearly defined roles actually in the midst of an incident response. So the first is the tech lead, and they're the one who is leading the troubleshooting. We then have a communication manager, so they are providing the liaison support between engineering and the support organization and our customers ultimately. And then we have the incident commander role, and so they're the ones that are actually coordinating all of the people within the response.
So I want to highlight 3 characteristics of incident response that are important as we unpack the incident commander role itself. So the first thing that we need to remember about incidents that differentiates them from day-to-day engineering activity is that they're high stakes. The outcome matters. So if you have a CSS bug that makes a menu the wrong color, it's off-brand, you need to resolve that, but it's probably not an incident. If you have a CSS bug that hides the login from all of your customers, that's probably an incident. You need to respond to that because that really matters to your customers and to the business. And because incidents are high stakes, they're also high cadence, which is a fancy way of saying there's time pressure. You have to resolve the problem as quickly as possible, and you're going to make different trade-offs under that time pressure than you would in a longer time span response. And finally, and perhaps most importantly for the incident commander role, almost all incidents of any note are a group activity. At New Relic, you always have at least an incident commander and a tech lead, and usually you have more people who are involved in responding to an incident. So we're going to talk more about why that group activity matters in a minute.
We love group activities.
We do.
Okay. So as said earlier, incident commanders are the ones that are coordinating the response. They're not the person troubleshooting the issue or communicating to our customers or handling the PR. They're the person at the center of the storm coordinating all of the other players. And so getting all of these people to work together effectively, bringing everybody up to speed and working under pressure is really expensive. Every new person brings in new knowledge, they have new perspectives, but they also need to be brought up to speed, and so that also is a new resource with a new expense. And the IC helps pay down those costs. It's not through command and control by telling people what to do, but it's by regulating the flows. So what exactly does that mean? Well, a good IC regulates the flow of the incident, and in an engineering context, that means that, once again, they're not controlling what happens. That is really impossible, plus engineers don't like other people telling them how to do their jobs. But since they're high stakes, high cadence group activities, they need to coordinate all of these people and reduce the expense of overhead and coordination. So a good IC regulates the flow to make sure that it's a little less expensive, so less overhead for the engineers, less confusion for customer support, less stress all around for all of the participants. A good IC regulates 3 flows. The first is emotion, and the next is information, and the final one is analysis. So the 3 flows really build upon each other. You certainly can't think very well if you're panicking, and if you don't have the right information, that you're not going to be able to analyze, and you're not going to be able to solve the problem if you're not analyzing and troubleshooting effectively. So these are the 3 things that are most important.
So the first flow to regulate is emotion, and this might not be the first one that you think of, but I hope after today it is. We said incidents are high stakes, high cadence group activities, lots of people in the room, lots of stress, emotions are running high. Anyone who's been on the pager knows the spike of adrenaline that you get when you get page and you realized, oh, this is not good. So the 3 classic responses to danger are fight, flight, or freeze. We're all familiar with these. And the irony is that when you most need your prefrontal cortex running the show, you get flooded with stress hormones and you end up either running around like crazy or curled up in the fetal position in the corner. This is really important to keep in mind because people in reactive mode are terrible at solving engineering problems. So your first role as an incident commander is to get people out of that reactive mode. If people are getting combative, get them to calm down. If people are panicking, they're running around trying a million different things, get them to slow down and think. And if they freeze up, if they're getting stuck and banging their head against one idea, do whatever it is you need to do to get them moving again. Again, people in reactive mode, very bad at solving complex engineering problems. So the faster you can get people into a calm and focused state of mind, the faster the rest of the resolution is going to go.
Definitely. Now, the next priority is regulating the flow of information. And that's largely about understanding who is in the room. So what do they already know? What don't they know? What don't they really even need to care about? Engineers know their systems, and they really care about the details of what's happening. Customer support doesn't necessarily care about all the details. They care about what the current impact or potential impact is to our customers. You know, executives, security, legal, they all need somebody that speaks their language to serve as a bit of a translator when we have these large incidents. So flowing the information is about listening, filtering, and then acting on what's actually meaningful. Do you need to page another team? Maybe. Is there a domain expert who could come in and assist in solving a thorny problem? Are there other resources that the teams need? I mean, do they just need some more LaCroix? Now, if you act as a conduit to get the right information to the right people, your solution to the problem is likely to surface a lot faster.
So you've got everybody calm and focused. You've got the right people in the room trading the right information. The final flow to regulate is the flow of analysis. Now, sometimes you have an incident where you quickly identify exactly what's going on. You know what to do to resolve it. It's just a matter of implementation. Great. But then there are incidents like the one where one of our engineers decided to ask himself, what if I ran a query on our internal database system with 65 consecutive wildcards? What would happen then?
It's bad. It's actually a bad thing.
It's a very bad thing. It surfaces all kinds of interesting things that are happening in the Java middleware that have to do, of course, with regular expressions, and you really confuse your incident response team for a while. Now, incidents like this where weird things are happening in the system and you have absolutely no idea why are scary in the moment, but they're also really valuable opportunities if you can capitalize on them, because they start to surface where your people's mental models of your complex system are out of sync with reality and where their mental models are out of sync with each other. This is a really valuable calibration time. So in order to deal with these more interesting incidents, a good incident commander doesn't step in and know the answers. They step in and ask the right questions. They challenge assumptions. They ask people, how do you know what you're saying is true? They ask people to articulate their thought process, even if you as the incident commander don't have their area of expertise and don't really follow what they're saying. Asking them to articulate their thought process can uncover really valuable lines of inquiry. Also, because the incident commander is not the person troubleshooting, they're the person coordinating the response, they usually have more bandwidth than the person who is deep dived into the problem. And so they're able to take a wider view and do things like remind people of abandoned lines of inquiry that you might need to reopen. They also can help to guide the analysis process and help people with thinking through how they're doing troubleshooting. For example, if people are brute forcing and trying to solve a problem end to end, get them to stop and say, can we bisect this? Helping people with the problem-solving process itself is a really valuable role that the incident commander can play.
Definitely. Now, in order to manage the three flows, an incident commander needs to arrive on the scene with a good sense of context. So first, they need to be reasonably fluent in your systems, and that would be both technical and human systems. They need to know the general architecture of your system, how things fit together, and what areas of your system are under the most strain at the current moment. They also need to understand the organization because they need to understand where to go to get help, what people can help do what, how to reach those people, especially if it's the middle of the night, and based on what's happening right now, what that problem is. They also need to be fairly familiar with the incident response process and have managed through and facilitated incidents before. They don't have to have it all memorized, but they definitely have to have good muscle memory. It's also really helpful if they have the documentation at their fingertips and are not afraid to use it. When it comes to the analysis and helping with decision making, as Beth was talking about, a good IC knows also what the company's priorities are. So at New Relic, for example, we must be able to ingest and store our customers' data. If we can't do that, it's a really bad thing. So if we have to make a decision, trade-off between killing a user display or dashboard versus dropping data, we are going to focus on saving the data first.
So this is great for an individual who wants to become better at being an incident commander themselves. But one of the questions that organizations face is, how do you enable people to be incident commanders? How do you find the right people and train them? Now, you might ask first, is being an incident commander a learnable skill, or is this some innate talent that you've either got or that you don't have? Well, the answer is unequivocally, you can learn to be a good incident commander. Other industries have been doing this for decades. We can do the same thing. Having said that, as with everything, there are going to be some people who are going to take to it more easily than others. There are certain personal traits that are going to lend some people to being stronger incident commanders than others. And so the question becomes not, can we train people to be incident commanders, but who can we train most effectively and efficiently? Who can we invest our time in most effectively to enable them to be a good incident commander?
Right, so some people do take to this process like a duck to water. Others definitely need more training. And at New Relic, we expect all of our engineers to be on call for their own services, so they actually need to know how to command an incident. As Beth mentioned, we have a NERF team for the higher severity incidents, and we have our bot auto pages in based on severity, so help will come if you need it. But so for these high pressure incident commanders, we've seen 3 traits that are prerequisites. And the first is, as mentioned before, a certain level of technical fluency. And in particular, the incident commander needs to actually have a very strong technical vocabulary. They need to understand the conversation that's happening within the room, virtual or physical, and they need to be able to participate in the discussions in useful ways. Don't have to be the expert, have to understand the lingo though. They also need to be well calibrated, and that is both in their technical knowledge, blah. Words are hard this late in the day. They need to have an accurate sense of what they know and what they don't know, and who knows what the edges are. So of the things that they're not as familiar, where do they get help? Second, they have to have good self-regulation. And so this means that if you can't regulate the flow, you can't regulate the flow in the room if you can't regulate your own intellectual and emotional response. So a good IC needs to be able to remain calm while still keeping, a motivated sense of urgency in the room. Lastly, they need to be willing. So I did say everybody has to be on call, so that's part of our interview process. But the person who's taking on this role actually needs to understand that it's valuable and that by taking this on, they will actually add to their skill set. They'll learn valuable skills. They'll learn a lot about our platform. And they also, as an organization, need to be recognized if they have really great skills. And so, for example, our NERF team, which is volunteer, they need to get recognized for this excellence.
Now, it wouldn't be a talk about incidents if I didn't at least mention blameless culture. And having a blameless organizational culture is especially important for cultivating great incident commanders, because Eliza touched a little bit earlier on the fact that incident commanders need to know the company's priorities so that when they have to make sacrifice decisions, they know what to sacrifice. Well, these are people who are going to be making difficult trade-offs under pressure. They don't know what the outcome is going to be. Sometimes things don't go well. They need to know that the organization has their back and is going to support them no matter the outcome of those difficult decisions that they make. So if we think back to the Amazon S3 outage, does anyone remember the triggering event for that outage? It was an authorized engineer following an official playbook, typed the wrong command, I think they typed in the wrong host name or something, hit enter, and boom, S3 down for 14 hours. Now, Amazon did not go to that engineer and say, you messed up. They didn't blame them. They said, well, you shouldn't be able to take down an S3 region with one line at the command line. That is a system problem. That is not, quote unquote, human error, which is a whole other talk for another day. So a good organization, for its own sake, as well as for the sake of its people, understands these things and will support their engineers, both the people who are doing the troubleshooting and the incident commanders who are responsible for making those decisions, knowing that people make the best decisions that they can at the time and trusting people to do their best.
Okay, so how do you actually prepare people to do their best? How do you prepare them to be good incident commanders? So we've talked about having tooling and processes in place, and that's pretty much table stakes. It's really hard to be an incident commander if you're inventing the process as you go, or if you're spending time coordinating a bunch of people following divergent processes. So once you have those processes in place, you also need good documentation, and you're using it under high stress, so it needs to be very, very clear and exceptionally easy to navigate. The next piece is training. Now, you can provide some basic training for sure, and we do that for all of our engineers, but how do you practice being an incident commander short of having an actual incident? Some of the things you can do are have game days. So a game day is where you actually introduce a fault into your system and see how your system responds. Did you make it as resilient as expected? Sometimes that answer is no. So if you're already doing something like this, you can also introduce the incident commander role as part of that process. If you're not doing it, you could run a game day simply for the incident commander role itself. The next step is actually what we call adversarial game days. And so very similar to the first example, however, a team member injects fault into their systems. The rest of the team knows that the game is afoot, but they don't actually know how their system is going to fail or exactly when it's going to happen. And this is really, and do this in staging maybe first, not production. But yeah, we're no fun. Oh, wait, Holly told us we have to have fun at work. So this is actually an even better way to get practice as an incident commander because it really simulates an actual real live production incident because of the unexpected nature of the challenge. The other thing that you can do here is we have trainees, so to speak, who are experienced ICs. They want to become NERFs. But now that we have this NERF team, nobody's ever managing like the big everything's on fire incidents themselves anymore. We sort of gave ourselves this problem of chicken and egg. So what they'll do is they'll have a shadow rotation. So they'll spend time with the nerfs, they'll rotate in, they'll participate in the high-level incidents, shadowing a nerf, and then we'll reverse it and have an experienced nerf shadow them when they have their first major incident. So those are a couple of ideas. There is a challenge if you don't already have strong incident commanders, you do have that chicken and egg problem. But if you do have strong ICs already, then helping them just to understand the skills that they have and what makes them good at what they're doing will help them be really great mentors for your ICs in training.
So we've talked a lot about our NERF team, and they're really interesting to watch in action because they've become such experts in our systems as well as in incident response as a result of managing these high severity incidents. So I want to highlight some of the things that we've noticed are habits of these top-notch incident commanders. So the first thing is what one of our NERFs calls being familiar with the explodey bits of the system. NERFs, because they are constantly attuned to what's happening in the incident space, are very aware of the vulnerabilities of the system. This is valuable as an incident commander because you tend to develop an intuition when something weird is happening. You know what's likely to explode, and you can often shortcut people to jump and look at the likely culprits. It's also really valuable just in the broader organization because being attuned to these explodey bits helps people to understand what the current risks are and can help you in the more proactive phase as well as the reactive incident response phase. We've talked a lot about knowing the people at the boundaries of your expertise, being able and willing to pull in other people. So knowing what you know and knowing who lives at those boundaries so that you can go and pull in the right experts who can, again, shortcut you through a thorny problem. And in addition to knowing who those people are, really being willing to draw in additional resources. We've been hearing today about the importance of generativity in addition to productivity. Good incident commanders really understand this. They understand that in these high-stakes situations, you have to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And so instead of trying to be the resource, good incident commanders know that it scales much better to gather the right resources. And then finally, incident commanders really understand that the best thing isn't to get the right answer from the right expert, but rather to get multiple perspectives from different people who understand different aspects of the system and compare those different perspectives to get a useful answer. There is no right answer in an incident, but there are more or less useful answers. Comparing multiple perspectives from multiple people is a critical step to untangling those really difficult incidents.
All right, so to recap, incidents aren't going away. In fact, the price of success is that you're probably going to deal potentially with bigger failures. So incidents that are higher stakes, higher cadence, potentially larger group activities. So you can definitely benefit from having highly skilled incident commanders to coordinate those efforts. Any incident benefits from a strong incident commander, but especially the big ones. Good incident commanders actually regulate the flow of emotion, information, and analysis so that you can get to resolution as quickly as possible. And they know their systems, both technical, human, they know the incident response process, and they know the company's priorities in resolving those incidents. So as an organization, you can support incident commanders with processes and tooling, but also finding ways to get individuals those real-world guided practices.